Leon Olguin here, and welcome to At Home with Music. It's pretty cold outside here in the winter time up on the mountain, so I put on the flannel today. I'm trying to stay warm. I've received many encouraging and insightful comments during my time producing videos for At Home with Music. I'd like to share with you today a comment that I received from a viewer who posed a very insightful question. This viewer wrote, "I'd love to hear from you an opinion on what makes an artist a good musician. Is it a variety of instruments that he or she can play? An ability to improvise on the spot, both in composition, on paper, or playing live? Or is it more about having that feeling inside of you that navigates you like stars navigated sailors in the vastness of an unknown ocean?" I love the poetic way that this particular inquiry ends. I'm going to start with the first question. What makes an artist a good musician? Now, I think the best way to answer this question is first, we need to define what is an artist and what is a musician, and what's the difference between these two? Is there a difference between the artist and the musician? In other words, are all musicians artists? Are all artists musicians? In order to answer this question, I want to draw upon my experience as a record producer. I owned and operated a small recording studio starting in 1990. And I still have the studio today, although I do more video production than I do record production. Although I still have artists that come up here on the mountain to record with me. As a producer, I performed many different tasks. Often I was called upon to be an arranger or a performing musician, a supporting musician, a session musician, if you like. And so here are some of the categories I believe that I've worked with. I've worked with musicians who were also artists. An artist is someone with a musical idea or vision that creates or contributes to the music creation. Now, the artist/musician is usually proficient at their instrument, usually guitar or piano, these being the two instruments that are used to accompany oneself. Now, there are some artists who are proficient at multiple instruments and can do it all themselves. Think of guys like Paul McCartney, who can play drums and guitar and bass and keyboard, or Charlie Puth, or Jacob Collier, or Prince, or even Rick Astley, the guy who did Never Gonna Give You Up. He actually produced some albums later on where he played all the instruments. There are other artists who need a little help but still contribute greatly to the arrangements, somebody like Elton John or Michael Jackson. These artists find other artists to collaborate with to make a full song. And so you might have a songwriter. I've had songwriters come into my studio. They can write a song, and then they use my services as a producer, and I have the necessary skills to turn that into a full song. I've also worked with artists who were not musicians themselves. These artists had a musical idea in mind, and as the producer, it was up to me to hear them communicate their ideas to me and try to tell me how they wanted them to be executed. And so I've worked with singers who create lyrics and melodies, but they can't play an instrument. Sometimes they couldn't play any instrument at all, or they couldn't play well enough to accompany themselves. And so as a producer, I would take their melody and their lyrics and add accompaniment and instruments, and I would try to draw from them their ideas of how they would like it to sound. Sometimes it was hard to work that way because they didn't have the musical terminology to express what they wanted. But eventually, as I got to know the artist's preferences and the musical style they were after, it got easier. And so you have artists who are not musicians, but they're still involved in the creation of the music. You have musicians who are not artists. Now, a musician can be called an artist if he contributes his musical ideas or her musical ideas to the making of original music. If a musician learns and performs songs or performs music by reading a musical score written by someone else, he or she is simply a musician. And that's, of course, a valuable thing. I was in a cover band, several cover bands over the years, and I was not necessarily an artist because I was recreating somebody else's songs. Now, it's not black and white, you see. Sometimes we'll reinvent the song. And in that case, we're not trying to make it sound like the record, and so we're adding our own things to it. And so in a sense, we're kind of like artists. But in reality, if you're in a cover band, you're not really an artist, but you are a musician. Now, what about classical musicians? Well, I was trained to learn the notes and reproduce them according to the composer's wishes when I was being classically trained. But I would add my own interpretation. You can listen to 2 recordings of the same classical piece, and they can be very different because of the way they were interpreted by the performer. So, once again, there's not a black and white division between artists and musicians, but we can summarize this by saying that artists are involved in creating music, whether they are musicians or not. Musicians become artists when they contribute their musical ideas to a song, in the creation of that song. Musicians that simply learn and play songs or play music written by someone else, for the most part, they are simply musicians, but not necessarily artists. So finally, musicians can be artists. Not all artists are musicians. I hope this is about as clear as mud. I mean, there's no set, hard line division here. Now let me briefly address the rest of the question. What makes an artist a good musician? Is it a variety of instruments that he or she can play? Well, not necessarily. Although being able to play a variety of instruments can make an artist capable of producing a complete recording of their song, other artists, they need help from other musicians to help bring their musical vision to life. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to be great on all kinds of instruments. Now, is an ability to improvise on the spot, both in composition or playing live, does that make an artist a great musician? Well, artists who can improvise, of course, are able to play their instruments well enough and will often capture those improvisations. Maybe they'll record them or write them down and use them to write a song, to create their own music. Is it more about having that feel inside of you? Well, now we're talking about interpretation. Great artists often have this ineffable, undefinable quality of feel in their playing, especially when they're playing their own creations. So I hope I've been able to answer in somewhat of a fashion this very insightful question. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, then I encourage you to leave those in the comment section below. I will be sure to respond. You can also support my work on Patreon. I encourage you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. That helps the channel a lot. I've been encouraged by the number of you that have subscribed in the past couple of months. I appreciate it very much. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you in the next one.